And we are live.
Hello and welcome. We've got a couple more minutes, so I'm just going to hold out and wait for everyone to get here. Okay, I've got 1:30, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. And Christine, for some reason, I'm not seeing everyone who's joined. Are there videos on probably?
Right. Everyone's microphone and video has been disabled because this is a presentation and not a networking session.
Okay, awesome. All right, just checking. I was expecting the Brady Bunch view. Okay, well, welcome. Go ahead, Christine.
I was going to say, tragically, we do not get to see everyone's smiling faces.
Yeah, I regret that. Well, welcome. I do want to just take a minute and introduce myself. I'm Elizabeth Ramsey, and I am a professor at Tennessee Tech in Cookeville, Tennessee. I'm really happy to be with you today and am excited to just bring you a little bit of information that hopefully can help your classrooms. Christine is also with us, and she's our room host, and so she's here to just help us connect and let us know anything that we need to know if we need to connect on questions or content. So let's go ahead and just get started. I want to talk to you today about implementing what a lot of times is referred to as a morning meeting. I have morning / afternoon meeting into the classroom. And this really is a trauma-informed approach. Now you can see, if you go back to my original slide, I'm going to focus on implementing social health education using a trauma-informed classroom approach. But what I want you to realize is that you can use any of these trauma-informed care classroom approaches to any content that you teach. Also, I want us to be able to identify the major components needed for a trauma-informed classroom. And also, I want to talk to you about how I have used the use of like a daily journal with children in organizing their social health content. So again, I think that's something that you can use. I noticed somebody was coming from cosmetology. So I think this would be something you could use in any of your classrooms. Also, just making modifications. That's the other really big thing that I want to talk about today. Making modifications for students who have experienced trauma, and what we can do for those students who do need those modifications. Okay, so the first thing that I want to talk to you about is just social health in general. So let's see, I'm going to end show, and I'm going to pull up the state standards. Can you see my screen? Are you seeing state standards, introduction to social health?
Yes, it looks good.
Awesome. Okay, so I just want to show you these real quick. I'm guessing some of you probably have taught this content, Remember, this is middle school content, so the grade level is 5 through 8. So basically, our course standards are grouped into different content areas. So we have healthy lifestyles, lifespan development, healthy relationships and communications, career exploration, resource management, and then appropriate technology use. So I just wanted to quickly show you, I have those all written down right there. Now, let me tell you a little bit about what I did. So as you know, I'm at Tennessee Tech. I'm a professor there. I'm over family and consumer science education. So I'm working with pre-service teachers. And then I also teach in the area of child development and family relations. So in between that career and just some other careers, I did end up teaching in middle school. Where I taught, there was no FACS program, and I was actually hired to teach English, 5th grade English. I have my general license. I'm general ed, gen ed, K6, and then I'm FACS ed 612. So anyways, I was hired to teach English to 5th graders. And what I noticed just right off the bat, when I got in that situation teaching there, is that I noticed that our school was having a lot of behavior issues. And I'm just going to circle this piece right here. And as you probably are all familiar with RTI, response to intervention, and how that's a 3-tiered approach. Well, there's also an approach, a 3-tier approach to behaviors. So essentially what happened, I was probably 3 weeks into teaching at that school. And I noticed that the same children who were struggling with their behavior issues were the same children who were struggling across the board. And literally we kept a grade-wide Google Doc where we would go in and document whatever a misbehavior that they had done, the consequence. This way, all the teachers were communicating. We were all on the same page about what was happening. And basically, after so many behavior issues, that child would end up in after-school suspension, recess detention, lunch detention, in-school, out-of-school suspension, just things would tally up, and eventually that child would end up, having bigger consequences than just what was happening within the classroom. Well, so what I began to say, of course, and I know you guys, a lot of you are family and consumer science educators, and you realize that children, we can't expect for them to have these great behaviors if nobody's ever teaching them choices. If nobody's ever talking to them about some other alternatives to behaviors, or some way to maybe manage their anger, or to manage their outbursts, that these behaviors aren't going to change. So I wanted to kind of get away from this punitive approach and kind of say, hey, let me take our kids that are struggling and let me teach them social health. Okay, now remember, I started by showing you the state standards to social health, which we were not teaching social health in our middle school. Our program had been cut. It hadn't been probably in our school, in that middle school, probably for, I would guess, 10 to 12 years. So what I did, I volunteered, and a lot of people called me crazy, but I volunteered to take those children who were identified as tier 2 to tier 3 behaviors, and I took them during remediation, so during R&E. So these children, R&E, response to intervention, these children typically are going to math or reading, extra instruction, extra remediation time during R&E. And what I did is, and all of our reading, math, English teachers agreed, gosh, if our kids are just, we're not seeing them tick up. We're not seeing any improvement in math, or we're not seeing any improvement in reading, or we're not seeing any improvement in their ability to write, the skills that we were working with them on. Hey, let's step back, let's pull back, and let's do some social health education, and see if we can't begin to get that marker to move. So that's how I ended up implementing social health during R&E. Right, I just want to tell you, at our particular school, we had collaboration on Mondays. So I actually was implementing, my kids would go somewhere else on Mondays, and then they came to me Tuesday through Friday. Okay, so are there any questions about that? Christine, I'm just going to trust that you're going to tell me if any questions pop up. Okay, so right away, I do want to tell you that I had some flexibility in that I was not collecting data. Well, I was collecting data, but I was not required to focus on all of those content areas that I showed you. I could kind of pick and choose what our focus would be. So I decided, based on the fact that these kids were struggling socially, that they were in trouble a lot, they were struggling with their relationships, that I just had us have a strong focus in healthy relationships and communications, lifespan development, and healthy lifestyles. Now, I will tell you that I also did some things with them regarding career exploration, resource management, and appropriate technology use. Because, oops, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Many of my kids, you know, of course, once you get to have them in those small groups and you begin to talk about family and relationships, and you begin to realize, like, things like I had children say to me, I'm really tired today. And I would say, why are you so tired today? Well, I stayed up really super late playing on my iPad or screen, whatever they were playing on. And I would often ask them, you know, tell me about, you know, the rules in your household regarding your screen time. You know, what are you allowed to do? Oh, it doesn't matter. And these kids would stay up all night. You know, nobody was really regulating their behaviors. And they would stay up all night, you know, playing these games, and then they come to school so tired. So I did get into some things like resource management, time management, decision making, because, you know, a lot of times they just weren't monitored in the home. Okay, so let's talk just a little bit about a morning meeting, because remember, this was one of our strategies that we wanted to cover. So the morning meeting, if you were just to Google morning meeting, you're going to see basically these 4 principles of a morning meeting pop up. So you have a greeting, a sharing, an activity, and a message. I do want to tell you that morning meetings are really recommended for kids who've experienced trauma. It's a great way to start your day or to start your class. I personally like to refer to them as morning or afternoon meetings, because a lot of times you have these kids in the afternoon, you know, especially if you're teaching in a middle school or high school setting, and you've got, you know, new kids coming to you throughout the day. So it's not always feasible that you could call it a morning meeting. So anyways, I have a little note up there, Edutopia. They have some great articles on it if you just want to read in general about a morning meeting. But I want to tell you about how I modified the morning meeting to meet the needs of my class, specifically, you know, my class that I was teaching social health. So the first piece that I want to tell you about is the greeting. And I do want to tell you that it's very important, especially when you're working with children who have experienced trauma, that you say their name, that you greet them. Every time you see them, when they first come into your classroom, that you say their name. Because sometimes you have a child who whose parents maybe are suffering, you know, having a drug addiction or fighting an addiction with alcohol. And they may actually, this child in your classroom might actually be neglected because of just the circumstances that mom or dad are in. And they're not hearing their name at home, or they're not hearing anybody, you know, that's greeting them and saying hello to them and using their name. So sometimes I feel like my kids, when I say their name, I'm the first person that they hear their name from all day. So I always like to say, good morning, Johnny, or good afternoon, Johnny. And then my kids, I teach them that they need to respond to me. I do not force them to speak to me. I don't require that they say good morning or good afternoon back or even a hello, but I do want them to acknowledge me in some way. So, and a lot of times this is a good gauge for me. And I'll even tell them, if you're not up to talking today, that's okay with me. You can give me a wave, or you can give me a nod. You know, do something to where I know that you know that we're communicating. And so, and of course we teach about nonverbal and verbal communication. So anyways, this was really nice, and I could oftentimes gauge how my students were doing based on the way that they returned their response in greeting me went. Now the next piece that I did was a sharing, and you can see just a basic sharing piece right here in a morning meeting. Well, I want to teach you what I did. So I'm going to show you my next slide, and I have this in a PDF form in your resources, and we may have to ask Christine to make sure that you can see them there. But if you notice, this is just a PDF. You can literally cut this. You see where my lines are, to where you can make 4 cards. And I would have these in baskets, to where when the children came in first thing, they would get to write down a news like, hey, my family got a new puppy. Hey, my family, you know, had this great experience, whatever it is. Or maybe news like, hey, did you know the COVID rate is up? You know, whatever the news is that they want to share for the day. Sometimes they would pick a concerns card. I'm concerned about blah, 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 because blah, blah, blah. So they would engage in writing about their news, their concern. Shout outs. You know, hey, I would like to give a shout out to Mrs. Allen, because she did a great job in science class, and I had a lot of fun working on the lab. You know, whatever that looks like for them. An apology. I would like to apologize to, write the person's name down, because my words or actions may have hurt their feelings, and I'm sorry. I do want to tell you guys that you would be shocked at how children respond to this. Because the truth is, you know, we were talking about the content area of social health, and I can't tell you how many times I had children who struggled getting along with children, and they would come in and use this apology card. And what I did is I had them write down something. They could write down whatever they wanted to. They got to pick their card every day. And then if they wanted to, they could stand up and briefly share, but they did have to write something first. And I saw a lot of healing actually come through these cards. Let me just move back to my previous slide. So we have our sharing piece, and then we go down to song video. Now, I personally love this, because after, before our lesson, I would incorporate a song, and you can see that right here, prior to the lesson, song. I would recommend just Googling, like, you know, playlists for kids, for teens that are, you know, appropriate. But I ended up pulling a song, and I think I had down there for you, the example was like Walking on Sunshine. Sometimes I had my kids make requests. That was fine with me if I could listen to it ahead of time and make sure that there were no like negative words in it. I say negative, inappropriate words. Sometimes my kids, of course, this was 5th grade, I found like even like little Disney videos. They loved that stuff, and we would get up and dance. Sometimes we didn't play necessarily a video, but it was just a song. And there again, I could tell, I could gauge the temperature of how my kids were feeling, whether they enjoyed participating in dancing or singing, or just, you know, how they responded right there. So I've just taken a few minutes. The other thing that I want to tell you, you know, just starting off our day, just a few minutes at the beginning of class to do these 3 simple things right here. The greeting is when I always called roll. It wasn't a traditional roll call, but I would mark my attendance at that point. So I've gotten my attendance out of the way. My kids have come in and had an activity where they're engaged using the sharing piece. And then the song or video just kind of puts everybody in a happy mood to start their day. So next I would go into my lesson. Okay, so I'm gonna just tell you, I use the textbook Discovering Life Skills, which was published by Glencoe. Now, keep in mind, we had no FACS program. We had no funding. So I literally went to the local college and borrowed materials from the college. And I had taught there previous as a lecturer while working on my PhD, and it was kind of in between that time. They didn't have a position for me, and then had graduated with my PhD and teaching English, fifth grade English, and social health. And I just went back to those professors and just said, hey, let me borrow some materials. And I borrowed an old book. The latest version is green. The one that I was using was red, and I just made accommodations as needed, especially regarding like technology. But I found that discovering life skills really did complement the Tennessee state standards quite nicely. And I was able to cover a lot of those standards with that text. I also want to tell you that the chapters were divided into sections. Now, I'm not a Glencoe representative by any stretch of the means, but this book just worked for me. And I really like a structured approach. And I appreciated the chapters with clear sections that, really kind of matched up with my standards. So I'm just going to give you an example of a handout that I'm going to show you. Let's see, I have example, conversation, facing conflict, and preventing conflict. So what I would do, let me X out of here, and I want to pull that up for you. Here it is. Okay, so I made this. Now, I'm sure you guys would probably make this much more attractive than what I did. But you can see here, that's actually 2 days worth, conversation and facing conflict. And what I would do when I ran those on the printer is I would just cut them in half. So they got a handout for each day. So they'd have a handout on conversation, and then a handout on facing conflict, and then preventing conflict. So let's just look at this for just a minute. Because if you look at my PowerPoint, it says 3 to 5 big takeaway questions. So what I would do is I would teach the content. So for example, let's talk about conflict for just a minute. What is conflict? I would have already talked about what is conflict, give them a definition for that. Have you ever experienced any of the following causes of conflict? That was one of my takeaway questions. Well, I would have already talked about, a misunderstanding. What is that? Jealousy. What is that? We would have gone over all of these things, and then they would be able to that day take a minute and reflect after the lesson and kind of give me back, hey, this is what conflict is. And then these are some of the things that I've experienced. And they would talk about these things and share about them. Now, let me tell you, here's one that's a little bit bigger, but it's still a day's worth, preventing conflict. I love teaching about conflict. One of the things I used to do was family mediation. So anyways, this area is always fascinating to me. But I love this question. The best way to avoid conflict is to pay attention to your own behavior. How do you treat others? Because that was one of the things that I found a lot of times, that kids needed to be able to kind of evaluate, what am I doing in this situation? Especially my kids who would end up in fights. I mean, I had 10-year-olds, and I'm sure you guys know exactly what I'm talking about. I had kids slamming kids up against lockers, and they were 10 years old, getting very violent. And so these questions were really good, and they could reflect on these. How are some ways that you can work on accepting other people as they are? And then they would, write down like, hey, these are the things I need to work on. And then learning to control their anger. We talked a lot about anger management. What do you do that helps you, control your anger? And they could add to that. Okay, so now what I want to tell you that I did with this is I would print out these sheets, hand them out as a daily lesson. We would go over the lesson. They would give me feedback. with these sheets. We would discuss them, discuss the answers right there, then and there. And then I would have them fold them in half and glue them into the journal. So just one side to where they could open it up and that be a page in their journal. Now, this right here, of course, when you cut that in half, that will fit perfectly in a journal. Composition book, when I say journal, I'm talking about a composition book. So let me minimize that and go back here. Okay, so I have the note there about the handout, the 3 to 5 big takeaway questions, how I gave them time to share their response, folding and gluing, and then of course keeping it in that daily journal. And they knew the drill. And we know as classroom teachers, there's a procedure to everything. They came into class, they pulled out their journals, you know, at the end of class week, glued that in with a glue stick, and then they would return their journals to a basket that I had, and they just kept them in my classroom. The other thing that I want to talk to you a little bit about is flexible seating. I'll talk more about this is when we get into trauma-informed care. But flexible seating, I did implement flexible seating. And again, you can Google this and see all kinds of different options about what you can do with flexible seating. My favorite thing for my kids turned out to be a big quilt that we would spread out on my rug, and we would sit in the floor together. They loved that. And we would have our lesson in the floor. And it was really great because I want you to keep in mind, these were kids that struggled. You know, these were the kids who struggled keeping their hands to themselves. These were the kids who struggled getting into arguments. These are the kids who struggled getting their work done. And so having me right there, sitting in the floor with them, their friends right around them, and it was just a very positive atmosphere to be on that rug with them. And I think the truth of the matter is that a lot of times we think of rug time and we think of like really young kids, but you know, older kids like to come and be close to you and to be, you know, in a more community atmosphere than sitting in that desk all day. The other thing I want to tell you about the lesson is that I did implement Fun Fridays. So every Friday, and I think that's my next slide. Let me just show you this real quick. We would put our social skills to the test. And I didn't tell them that's what we were doing, but that's what we were doing. We would play games. We would go on walks outside. We would, like during our citizenship unit, we talked about community service to the school, things that we could do. One day we went outside on Friday and we picked up all the rocks from the flower bed that had, you know, kids walk through those and kick them out. And we went through with buckets and collected all those rocks and just put them back in the flower bed where they belonged. They were like the mulch for the flower bed. But, you know, we just did things like that. And we voted on what we would do when we decided to do community service for our school. Another thing that I did for them is I took them to the library. I think probably because I was their English teacher, I understood the importance of them having some opportunities to choose some good books that were on their reading level. So we would have days where we would just go to the library. And you know what? The library is a great place to have good manners, to not run, to not, you know, horseplay. And so we would have a good time. The other thing we did sometimes is we ate breakfast together. We would eat breakfast with other R&E classes. We would a lot of times engage with our exceptional learners, our children with disabilities, and have breakfast with them. That was great. I felt like my kids, you know, especially when we were teaching, when I was teaching on things like empathy and being kind and treating other people with respect, that was a great way to do that. Another thing that I did on Fridays is I brought in guest visitors. So like, for example, when I was teaching on goal setting, My son happens to be a college student, and he sets a lot of goals, you know, and he lifts weights, and he's big and strong. And I will just be honest, I had more boys than girls in that group, and they loved Pete, my son. And I would bring him in, and he would talk to them about, you know, the extracurricular things he does, serving the university, you know, setting life goals, and working out, you know, things that they just like to hear about. I also brought in therapy dogs, which I thought that I was going to, you know, have to sign away my life to bring in dogs, but my school eventually slowly allowed it. Bring in the guidance counselor as a guest speaker, and just different role models. And I'll just tell you, role models, you know, when you start asking children, who's your role model? I'll never forget, I asked a little boy, and his mother did struggle with an addiction. She loved him, but boy, she was, you know, it was a tough little scene for him. But he told me, he said, my role model is my brother. And I said, well, tell me about brother. You know, what's brother do? And he said, well, he is really great at video games. And I said, oh, okay. So does he let you play his video? No, he really doesn't. He doesn't want me around, but he's really good at it. He would tell me some of the games he played. And then I said, well, so what else does brother do? You know, how old is brother? It turns out brother was probably in his mid-20s. And I asked us, you know, what's brother's job? Did he go to school? You know, tell me about brother. Well, brother didn't have a job. He lived at home with mom, and he played video games. And that was his role model. So, you know, it was really good when we had our unit on role models and what constitutes role model. This is what we talk about in social health. Okay. I'm going back to modifications. Okay, so talked a little bit about the daily journal, flexible seatings, and fun Fridays. That wraps into my lesson. Okay, now if you remember, modified morning meetings, we did our lesson, which was the journals, and then I always had an ending message. So before I get to the ending message, how I made modifications for children with their journals, and then I'll end with that ending message. So I'm doing okay on time. Okay, so let me first just tell you, a lot of times, especially for children who are struggling behaviorally, these are children who have experienced a lot of adverse childhood experiences. I don't take an ACEs quiz, but what I do is I listen very intently when I have parent meetings, and when I listen to kids and I listen to their story. And I can tell you, a lot of my kids who were in my R&E social health, I can list probably all of them, except I had a few who were in there who were on the spectrum, who had a lot of support at home. However, my children, the majority of my children probably had well over half of the ACEs. And I had some who had as many as like 9 out of the 10. So these are kids who have experienced trauma. And a lot of times our children who have experienced trauma academically are behind because there has been gaps in their education. A lot of times they've been neglected. They haven't had consistent schooling. They haven't had support that they need. So I had children who were reading and writing on a first grade level, yet they were in 5th grade. So let me show you a few things right here. I allowed them to use art instead of writing. So a lot of times if I had, you know, questions at the end of the day for the journal or a news shout out, concern, apology, I would give them the opportunity to illustrate it for me instead of writing it for me. And I can tell you, my kids who struggled putting pen to paper and writing love this option of illustrating. And I would include a lot of different mediums for them. We had days where we got out colored pencils, fine tip markers, regular markers, crayons. They love stuff like that. So for example, going back to our conflict example, I would say illustrate a time for me, draw, illustrate a time for me when you experience conflict. And I've had great drawings, arguments between friends at the Playland and McDonald's. I mean, I've seen it all. And then the other thing that I would do with them sometimes is I would allow them to talk instead of write. Now I can tell you might feel like you're turning on a fire hose when you give them permission to talk. But one of the things that I found most helpful was the use of a talking piece. And I hope that you can see my, I'm highlighting this right now. Use a talking piece. This can be like a ball that's a squishy stress ball. This can be a little stuffed animal, anything that you want to use that whoever's turn it is to talk, they're holding that talking piece. If they don't have the talking piece, it's not their turn to talk. And so I loved even like a squishy stress ball, because I would throw it to them. Instead of calling on them, I would say, okay, tell me about a time when you experienced conflict. And I would throw them the stress ball. They would hold the stress ball and they would get to tell me about a time. And then they would throw it back to me, and then I could throw it to another student. Sometimes you can allow the students to throw it to each other. I can tell you, set some guidelines, set some parameters. If anybody's getting wild with this, we shut it down. And they knew it. Mine knew that they couldn't just throw the talking piece across the room or out in the hall. And they were very respectful of it and loved it. It worked very well for us. The other thing that I have here is the use of conversation stems. And I don't know if you guys have seen this. I actually modified, let me pull it up for you right here. Oh, nope, that's not it. That's conversation something else. Not that. See if I can find it. Conversation stems. Okay, this I modified from Learn Zillion, but it's just a good way for kids to add on clarifying. Of course, these are all things that we're talking about in social health. I agree with Johnny because, and then say why they agree, or I see it differently because. But these are very respectful ways to have a discussion, have it between children. You can see here, I'll just let you read over that. But that's a great resource, especially when you need to teach kids to discuss amongst themselves. The other thing that I love to do, instead of writing, if they struggled writing, is I would allow them to use the computer, and there's a couple of great like word clouds, worded out, where you can go in and one time I had to have the children, I asked them to give positive descriptions of themselves. And I, of course, prompted them with about 80 different descriptor terms that they could choose. I had them circle which were their favorite, and then they could go into the computer and make a word cloud. This was a great fun thing to do. And then, of course, we printed them out, and they could fold them and glue them into their journals. That was a great deal. And then also, if you're trying to spur discussion, another great thing to do is to bring in animals. Run down to the science teacher, borrow her hamsters, guinea pigs, rabbits, whatever he's got. Because I found when I brought in the guinea pigs and we were crowded around them, we had like a little playpen in the floor that was, just about a foot tall, and the kids could just play with the guinea pigs, and they would talk. We could talk about those issues. We could talk about drugs and alcohol while we're playing with the guinea pigs. It really spurred conversation. Okay, the last part about that morning meeting, which I want to just show you again, is that ending message, okay? So I'm just gonna give you a few examples, play from current, right here. Now, you guys can do anything you want to, but I just ended the day. This would just be on my screen. We would read it out loud. Sometimes I would ask a volunteer to read it. Sometimes I would read it. Sometimes we would read it together. This one right here, the ducks, I'm just going to talk briefly about this. This is one of the biggest things my kids had to learn was that let things roll off your back like water off of a duck's back. And we talked a lot about that when they would have big, huge meltdowns and they weren't getting along with friends. And I would say, can this be water off a duck's back? I'm noticing that my time is coming to an end. I think I have 7 minutes. So you can go online, of course, and just Google, these positive sayings. Pinterest is a great place to find things like this. By the way, I had one of my kids make this analogy, the water off a duck's back, when they were studying about adaptations in science class, and got up and told the whole class about how there's some things that want to bother me, but I have learned that I'm going to let that roll off my back like water off a duck's back. It was like, whew, we're winning today. Okay, Fun Fridays. I've already talked about that one. I'm going to skip that, and I'm going to move on to a trauma-informed care classroom approach. So this time, I want to bring up a handout that I created, and I've actually used this handout a lot. I'm teaching right now a course in trauma-informed care right now, 4,000 level course at the university. But this right here, Strategies for Trauma-Informed Classroom, concept, mantra, and strategy, this is going to be very helpful to you, because I just want to tell you, and by the way, I've documented my sources at the bottom, so you can, pick up an entire book on it if you want more information. But a lot of times, you have to realize the concept with working with kids who have experienced trauma. When they're blowing up, when they're having a meltdown, the stress in their life, it's not you. Look at that. It's not about me. The stress is coming from outside of the classroom. It's coming from outside of the school. And so the strategy is to drop your personal mirror. Don't make it about you, because it's not about you. Number 2, concept, allow the student to de-escalate and regulate before solving the issue. This is huge when we're implementing a trauma-informed care classroom approach, because when a child is highly escalated, crying, lashing out, you cannot problem solve at that moment. So what I recommend is to have a quiet place in your room where children can feel safe to de-escalate. Sometimes that can be called a peace corner. For me, I actually allowed students to just go out into the hall and sit. They were not in trouble. We didn't use this as a, hey, I'm in trouble, I'm in the hall kind of thing. It was just, I need to take a minute to myself and just de-escalate there. I really like best to have something in the classroom and have like a peace corner to where they can stay in the classroom. But at that point, our school wasn't financially able to accommodate that. Number 3, it's never about the issue at hand. It goes much deeper. So when you have a child, coming unglued because they lost a challenge or a game or couldn't write something correctly, it's not that issue. It's much deeper. So what's really driving this child's behavior? That's the mantra. And the strategy is be the one who listens and values your student's voice. Ask them how you can help. Explore the underlying issue behind the behavior. I will tell you, just coming back to designating that quiet place, I would a lot of times have children who needed to de-escalate, and I would come out and I would say, you ready to talk? How you doing? And sometimes I would have a child say, no, like I can't talk. They were just still crying or still upset. And I would say, that's okay. When you're ready, I want you to know that I'm here and I want to listen to you. And, I would treat them with respect, and I would go out there when finally they would say, okay, I think I'm ready. Then I would come and just open the door. Tell me about what happened. And we would talk about these things, and I would value their voice. I can see how you feel that way. I can see how that hurts you. Validate those feelings. Also, it's a brain issue, not a behavior issue. I can teach an entire semester on the brain science behind trauma. And we know that the hardwiring of their brain, they're missing the ability to regulate to self-regulate. Their prefrontal cortex does not have that ability. It is a brain issue. And so my job, my mantra has to become, my job is to help this child in this school regulate, not simply behave. Incorporate regulatory activities into the culture of the classroom and support students in their ability to learn how to self-regulate. So one of the things that we know with brain science is that a lot of times children will revert back, and I'm pointing to the back of my head because they revert back to that brain stem activity, if this is the brain right here. And so just like deep breathing, closing your eyes and deep breathing, and just doing some things that help regulate your body will bring that child back down into a place where, you know what, okay, I can start to regulate my behavior again. I love number 5, discipline. It actually, the root word means to teach. It's not to punish. So discipline discipline should happen through the context of relationships, because you know what? Discipline is a teachable moment. I'm now at the place where you're realizing, you know what? This child needs to learn how to regulate his emotions. Use consequences that keep students in school. Try not to suspend them, keep them in school, and build those relationships. I have 1 minute left, so I'm going to quickly go through these. Shifting our lens. Stop asking the question, what's wrong with you, but what happened to you? These are just some things that you can do that we know that helps regulate children who have experienced trauma, help a child feel safe. That's one thing that I say all the time. We make good choices because everybody has a right to feel safe. And so, you know what? I can't let you hit your friends. I can't let you push your friends because that's not safe. And so we structure for safety. We structure for choice and empowerment. We let children have a choice where they can. And we structure for collaboration. I think that was the whole idea behind Fun Fridays for me, is an ability to collaborate. Trustworthiness and predictability. It's going to be the same every day you come in here. Every day. My classroom went the same way. It was based on a morning meeting style. Responding versus reacting. I'm really out of time, so I'm just going to let you look at this. But this gives you traditional reactions versus a trauma-informed response. Okay, let me go back to classroom approach, and I just went over all of that, so I don't have the need to do that again. Play from current slide, and I'm going to show you my last slide, which is thank you for attending, because it is officially 2:15. Do you have any questions for me? And this is your key word. I know a lot of you are building credit for attending, so Georgia with a capital G, and there's your session code. So what questions do I have? Christine, have you seen any pop up?
I have not seen any questions, but I have seen lots of affirmations and praise. I think you gave a wonderful presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Y'all are so sweet. That makes my day. Thank you. So I didn't get to see any of that, but thank you. And I am at Tennessee Tech. I should have typed, I'll try to go in there and give you my email address. If you guys ever need anything, contact me. I'm Ramsey, ERAMSEY at TNTech. So TNTECH.edu. That's my email address. And if you just go to the faculty, you'll see me there. You can do a search and find me. So stay in touch, and I can help you with any resources if you need them. All righty. And Christine, thank you. You've been great.
You're quite welcome. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Y'all have a good day.